Welcome into Texans Draft Live. We are 7 days out from finding out what the Texans do with the number 3 and number 13 pick overall. Hi, I'm DP Sidhu along with my good friend John Harris. And if you know anything about the draft, you know that he's been doing the Harris 100. So he's got lots of draft knowledge for you. Welcome in, Johnny.
How you doing, DP?
It's a fun week, and it's even more fun because we've got General Manager Nick Caserio coming up in a little bit, roughly about 10 minutes. He'll be doing his pre-draft presser, which, you know, is usually what the general managers do. Last chance to answer media questions before the draft takes place. So you answer questions about the draft without really answering questions about the draft, if that makes sense.
That's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to take 20 questions, and you'll walk out of there going, I don't even know. I think I'm more confused about what they're going to do at 3 and 13. I don't know. Are they picking at 3 and 13? I just walked out of there. I don't know anything. Every GM is sort of a master of dancing. Now, there are certain GMs that are having to answer some very pointed questions today, like Nick did last year about a quarterback that the Texans traded just recently. But there are some GMs around the league getting grilled about some of the wide receivers that are asking for different locations and such. Hopefully that's not the case for Nick today, but it's always I don't want to say challenge, but it's always kind of fun to decipher, okay, what did that mean? What did he really mean when he said that? Because I know he's trying not to tell us things, but is he telling us something? So it gets to be a little bit of a mind game. It's fun. What's
a smoke screen? What's not a smoke screen? The one thing Nick
all
Caserio,
a lie. It's all a lie.
But the one thing he has been clear about, he says the Texans are open for business when it comes to that number 3 pick. So the Texans are very, very open to trading out of that number 3 pick should anyone else want to trade in their place. So let's take a quick look at all the picks the Texans have right now for the 2022 NFL Draft. That could change between now and next Thursday or Friday or even Saturday. But you see the picks, the 3rd overall, the number 13 overall from Cleveland. They got an extra 4th from Cleveland as well. And they pick, look how many times they pick just in the top 80 alone, Johnny.
Yeah.
It's just a cornucopia of picks. It's so exciting to have a first-round pick once again after, I think, 3 out of the last 4 years the Texans haven't been picking on Thursday of the draft.
I mean, for somebody like myself who loves the draft the way that he does and appreciates the draft as much as he does, the last couple of years have just been, oh, my gosh, just Thursday night, just get over so we can get to when the Texans are making a pick. But you said it, and I think this is a great comparison. Last year, Davis was picked at 67, I believe. Nico was in the 80s, but not at 80. There are 5 picks from 3, 13, 37, 68, 80. I've got them memorized. Those 5 picks, and you said trade down or trade out at number 3. They may trade down, trade out of any of those picks.
Yeah.
There's 11 picks. I wouldn't be surprised if you said a number of 5 or 6 trades. There might be more than that. So we'll see what happens. The one thing I always say about trading down or even trading up, but in this case, more than likely trading down, you got a partner. You don't always have a dance partner. You may ask for a hand, and no, we don't want to trade. You've got to find that person that says, sure, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Given Nick Caserio's contacts throughout the league, there are a lot of lines out in the water he can throw and get some bites and some nibbles back on it. But I'm always a trade down guy, and I always have to qualify it with, but I understand how difficult that can be because you do need that trade down. Hey, DP, I got a peanut butter and jelly. Do you want it? Like, no. Well, I can't trade that if I can't find the person to do it or the team to do it. But Nick does a pretty good job of having contacts throughout the league. Makes it a little bit easier, whereas some GMs don't have those contacts. And because they don't have those contacts, they may only have 2-3 teams that they can call that they feel good about. And if those teams don't want to do it, well, then you have none. But if Nick can call a dozen or more teams, he's going to find one that's amenable to a trade that's going to value the Texans.
Yeah, and what if there's a team that's really, really hungry for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a.k.a. a quarterback?
Right.
They are going to want to move up, and they're going to have to move up to get the guy that they want. It's all really it's a lot of fun to watch, and the Texans are in a great spot because there is no one particular pick, and I know we're going to get to your picks in a little bit, your top 16, but first, I do want to say that General Manager Nick Caserio has his press conference. Afterwards, he's going to be on this show live, and he's going to be answering your fan questions, so you definitely want to drop in your questions, and we've never done that before. We've never had the general manager on live answering fan questions on this show, so I'm super excited about that, as I know you are, Johnny, but let's look at I call it the Sweet 16, the John Harris Sweet 16. It's the top 16 from the John Harris. I guess it's your mock draft.
Yeah,
it's not your Harris 100.
Second version of my mock draft. And in this version of it, DP, I went without trades. The first version, I had the Texans and the Falcons consummating a trade where the Falcons moved up to number 3, got themselves an Atlanta homeboy in Malik Willis, and the Texans moved down to 8, which I think it's a great move down. A lot of people have talked about, you mentioned the word, it's semantics, but it's trading out versus trading down. I don't want to trade out. Trading out means I'm giving up 3 because I'm getting picks next year. Mm-hmm. I don't want to trade out of the first round. I just want to trade down. I thought 3 to 8 was a good spot in my first mock draft. And then the more I thought about this, and you mentioned the word, quarterback. Everybody wants him. But here's the thing. Kind of goes back to our analogy a little while ago. Everybody might want one, but the supply may not be there. And that's where I think teams will have sort of a quandary, because when I did my first mock draft, as you see here, I don't have any quarterbacks going in the top 8. In my first one, I had Malik Willis going at 3. I had Kenny Pickett going at number 6. And when I sat back, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, and even though the quarterbacks, that's the one position, I don't know that there's a quarterback where a team says, pounding the table, and I won't do it because it'll make a loud noise, pound the table and say, I want insert name of quarterback here. Now, next year, DB, that's a different story. Totally different story. I was just looking at my 2023 mock,
my
2023 NFL draft board. I've already I haven't studied everybody, but I've started kind of loading it up with players I know that I need to watch. And I just, knowing the quarterbacks, I'm looking at going, that guy. There are about 8 to 10 guys I could see with really good, solid last years in college that are going to make the 2023 draft really crazy and really fun and really exciting. Those quarterbacks aren't here. So if a GM is in a position which, look, I don't want to lose games, but you know your job is safe and you're coming back for 2023, you're going to have that opportunity to be able to grab one of those quarterbacks. So long story short, I did this one without quarterbacks going in the top 10 and without any trades, even though, to our point, I do think 3 and 13 are spots where the Texans are going to make trades. So at number 3, I went with Ike Ekwonu. With Walker and Hutchinson off the board, I felt like the next best football player and fit for this Texans team, and that's hugely important, is Ike Ekwonu. And I have OT/OG on it. And there's been a lot of talk about Ike. And is he a guard? Is he a tackle? He played tackle at NC State. Going into the season, NFL types thought he was a guard and a guard only. So there were a lot of things that went into that thought process, like is he a tackle, is he a guard? What he is to me is a really darn good football player that can play either position. And that will help you in the long run. Now, in the long run, I think he could eventually go out to tackle. And you don't know you don't know how things go. We've seen that. You don't know how things go, but if you have a guy in-house that you know, hey, like Laramie Tunsil did in Miami. Laramie Tunsil was down in Miami his first year, and he played left guard. Brandon Albert moved out. Laramie moved over to left tackle, and away you go. Ike Ekwonu can do that as well.
All right, Jenny, let me ask you then. When you look at Evan Neal versus Ike Ekwonu, why Ekwonu over Evan Neal? Evan Neal did play both spots in college.
Here's the interesting thing about that. It's a great question, DP, because I've gone back and forth.
And we'll get to that, but first, I think Nick Caserio. Oh, he's coming up soon.
There he is.
Keep you posted. Nick Caserio is at the podium. Let's take a listen.
Got the heat lamp up here. Holy cow. Oh, that's amazing. I don't even know if we need this. I could probably do without it. Can you guys hear me? Or do we need it for the audio? Always about the camera.
All that time,
Are we good? Yeah. First of all, welcome. Appreciate everybody being here this afternoon. Exciting time for everybody. I'd say the organization, players, staff, coaches, the city of Houston. Actually, the first opportunity for you guys to see the new big screen TV. So technological upgrades here in the room. But it's a good opportunity for us here next week to continue to build our team for the 2022 season. Kind of working through a number of different phases, I would say, with the club right now. Off-season program, winding down here with some of our draft meetings, trying to compile as much information as possible, just to really fine-tune it more than anything else and just make sure that we're prepared and ready to go here for next Thursday. I'd say, first off, just a tip of the cap to the scouting staff. Really, they have put in as much time as anybody this process. I think this is a collective effort. It's a collaborative process. They do an unbelievable job. We ask a lot of them, and they deliver. And they're doing things here over the last, even over the last week or so, just collecting more information, kind of verifying information that we have. But, try to go through everybody here and just acknowledge them and name them. But from Lip, really on the college side, to Lip, Tom Hayden, John Richter, Zeke, Naj, George Panos, Bailey, Blaze, that might be missing a guy or two. George mentioned him, and then Baz on the pro side. Baz, Ronnie, Frank Edgerly, Rohit, Todd Jones. Nate Trott, going back kind of the college side. But those guys, they deserve as much credit as anybody. So, I think whoever we select next week, however many players we end up selecting, it's going to be a collective effort. It's not going to be about one person. It's not going to be about one player. It's not going to be, Nick's pick. It's not going to be Lovey's pick. It's going to be the Houston Texans pick. We're going to embrace that player. We're going to embrace him in our building, and we're going to try to develop him and grow him and give him the best opportunity to be successful, on the field on Sundays when they have the opportunity to play. So as far as the off-season program is concerned, I think we've had a really good turnout here the first 2 weeks, kind of a phase one, which it's really limited to mostly work in the weight room. The coaches have had an opportunity to meet with the players, so that's been good just in terms of system implementation, introduce some new terminology, introduce some new players to some of the things that we're doing. Again, the turnout's been outstanding. I think we're close to, 80%, 85, 90% of the team, and some of the players that aren't here have a legitimate reason. It's really a personal situation that they might be dealing with. So, it says a lot about the players. It says a lot about the staff that they're excited to be here. They're excited to work and get ready to go. And then next week, we'll have an opportunity to kind of get on the field, with the voluntary mini camp, which I would say that'll be more of individual kind of skill instruction. I'm not going to do anything, I would say, that puts the players in a position where they may be, at risk. So, but it'll be a good opportunity to get on the field. Be a lot of communication, a lot of individual work. So kind of simulation of maybe almost like phase two more than anything else. So, but that'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then we'll kind of transition Thursday night into the draft and kind of get rolling Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and hopefully have a good productive weekend. And get ready to go for the following week. So, try to give everybody a chance to ask a question here as we go. Start with Mark, try to answer some questions here, and we'll kind of get moving.
When you go into things like this, just kind of a general question, what are your priorities?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think the most important thing is just try to continue to build a team. That's the most important thing, and not get too caught up in, I would say, short term, where a player's picked, who the player is. The most important thing for any new player that comes in our building, rookie, veteran, second-year player, is work hard, be a good teammate, be selfless, put the team first, and just try to make progress and just try to develop your individual skill set more importantly than anything else, okay? And then the opportunities are going to come once we get on the field, and the best people are going to play. I think this time of year honestly, it's like silly season. There's so much misinformation that's out there from – who we've brought in for visits, what pro days I've been to, what players we've worked out that we haven't worked out. So you try to put that all aside and just focus on, the draft really is a mechanism to get the players in the building. So how do you do that? Look, they got to get picked in certain rounds. Certain players are going to get picked in certain rounds. But it doesn't guarantee that they're going to have, I would say, long-term success. So once you get them in the building is, all right, they're ours. Okay, everything that comes along with that player is ours, and their responsibility is to just try to take it one day at a time, just put one foot in front of the other, and just try to make incremental improvement and progress. And don't worry about what your role is. Am I going to start? How much am I going to be on the field? Who's playing around me? Am I going to play in front of this guy? That's not the type of program and mindset we want the players to have. I think Kirksey made a comment, last week or whenever it was, he just talked about our team and our program and some of the things that are important. And I completely agree with what Christian said. So I think a player that comes in here, especially a rookie, if I'm a rookie, I'm going to listen to what he has to say and watch his example, and it's about action more than words. So the expectation is the same for the player that we draft in the first round to the player that we draft in the seventh round to the player that we sign after the draft. It doesn't change. I think the external expectations might be a little bit different, but that's okay. That's what you guys have a platform. You can have fun with that, but that's not our job. It's not our responsibility. Our job is to develop the players in totality as much as we can, understanding certain players are going to maybe take a little bit more time than others. Other players might assimilate quicker. I mean, that's just the process that they're going to have to go through. So I think the attributes that we look for in players are no different than, drafted players to veteran players to players that have been in other programs. Once they get here, what can I do to be the best Houston Texan? What can I do to be the best teammate? That's where the focus needs to be. And what can I do to improve my individual skills as a player so that when I go onto the field, I'm physically and mentally prepared for the rigors of what I'm going to face.
How do you view it more as like this rebuild can kind of go underway more because you don't lost the draft capital you had a year ago?
Yeah, and I've never used the term rebuild. I think rebuild has kind of been an external term. I think what we've focused on is kind of building our team. So how do we build our team? Okay, what are the resources we have available? What are the assets that we have to deploy? So that's how we viewed it. I would say just in terms of the player acquisition process, where we are as we sit here today, I think, like you said, it's however many, 5 in the first 80, and then we have another 2 in the fourth round, so call it 7 in the top 108. That's assuming nothing changes, which I wouldn't hold my breath on that. So, but it's no different. It's try to get good players that are good people that understand we're building a program and we're building the 2022 team. That's really where the focus is. So it's short term, but also understanding, and I would say one of the things that's probably unique, Sarah, to this year's draft, there's some players that injuries are going to factor into the evaluation, right, wrong, or indifferent, but that could affect some players to some degree. So having an idea of, okay, maybe there's a player that's not going to play this year. Are you okay with that? Are you comfortable with that? You might be. And, okay, what's the draft capital that you have to allocate to that particular player? So you're worried about this year, but part of my job is to worry about the long-term, position of the franchise and just try to put ourselves in the best position possible. So whether it's draft resources, draft capital, salary cap situation, which we're in a much better position, I'd say, than not today than we were a year ago. I mean, I think we're second or third, depending on what you factor in the Denzel Ward extension with Cleveland. But, we're at the top of the league. So we have some flexibility, both from a salary cap standpoint and from a draft capital standpoint. The most important thing is making good decisions with those resources. You make bad decisions, you could have 500 draft picks, but if you don't use those picks appropriately, then, then it's not going to work.
Nick, you mentioned the amount of draft picks up there, up in the 108. You were talking about a lot of the player people you were giving credit to. How do you drill a draft? And you have to take like picks 1 to 100 as if you were picking each one. And what is the best way that you guys feel prepare you for anything that could happen when you have so many picks on front?
Yeah, there's no perfect formula. I think what you have to do is you evaluate the players, you assign a grade, and then really what we're doing now, it's not so much the vertical stacking as it is the horizontal. So you're kind of looking at equivalent valued players and their position relative to where you may have to acquire them. And part of our process is, we're not afraid to eliminate some players. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't like them, but maybe it's where they're expected to be picked relative to maybe the greater value we have on him. Let's not spend too much time on them. I mean, I'd say there's roughly 80 to 100 players that we would actually draft. It doesn't mean that we draft them all in the first round, but at some point, I would say that is about the number. Now, other teams could be differently. So what we have to do is look at our team, look at the positioning of our board, work at horizontally, and then just make an assessment about, okay, you know what? Okay, if we pick here, realistically, is this player a possibility? Well, you know what? Okay, if he's not a factor, all right, let's move on. All right, let's go to the next slot. Okay, this seems like maybe this is more of a sweet spot where you might be able to acquire that player. I would say this draft, generally speaking, it's a little bit of a crapshoot. I think there's players that are all over the place. I don't think there's a consensus on any player. I think if you talk to different teams, you talk to different people, who's the top player at this position, there's 6 players, you get 6 different answers. So I'd say, it could make it a little bit more hectic, but you have to trust your information, trust your resources, trust your preparation, trust your evaluation of the player, and then just be able to say, okay, this is how we view the player, this is what we think his role is going to be, but ultimately the player's performance is going to determine what their role is going to be. But, we look at some of the mock drafts or just I'd say for more general positioning, not, well, this player is projected to go 15th overall. Well, we're picking 13th. Is he going to be there? Not necessarily. You're trying to kind of get a general vicinity or range. Okay, this group of players graded this level and above. Okay, more than likely they're going to fall here. Okay, the next group of players, okay, how are we positioned? Is that player even a possibility? So I would say those are some of the discussions and dialogues that we're kind of having internally. And the reality is you really don't know until you actually get going. 32 players are going to get picked Thursday night. Okay, so once you get through Thursday, all right, then there's going to be another set of players that are going to come into play, and then we'll kind of recalibrate, Friday morning to get ready for the following night.
Nick, what do you think of the wide receiver market in this draft and how it measures up with your needs and your resources in the draft?
Yeah, I would say there's good players at various levels at most positions. It was interesting. I was actually kind of looking at some different positions and different players league-wide, some of the better players at their position. So you look at guys like Kelsey, look at guys like Kittle. One guy was a third-round pick. Another guy was a fifth-round pick. Austin Eckler, one of the better backs, I'd say, in the league, wasn't drafted. Marcus Colston, this is going back, not that I would date myself, but New Orleans, all-time lead receiver, he wasn't drafted. Everybody wants to talk about Brady, but forget about Brady for a minute. So Joe Tooney was, third-round pick. So I would say the reality, Stephon Diggs, there's another guy's a fifth-round pick. So I think our job is to understand the depth of the draft, top to bottom. Some positions, just by supply and demand, are going to have more players in those positions. So it doesn't mean that they're not good players. It just means certain positions, receiver, maybe they have more players. But just because there's more players doesn't necessarily mean that they're all created equal. So, okay, that player, that position versus another position, okay, well, maybe if we pick this player here, but there's, the supply at this position a little bit less, okay, so maybe more inclined to take this position now or vice versa. So I would say you try not to pigeonhole yourselves. I think it's just most important as much depth and understanding of the entire draft in each position as possible, even on down to the players that you don't think are going to get drafted. Say we spend as much time on that group probably as anything, including the top of the draft. So I would say you have to be careful about what your quote-unquote needs are or what your people perceive your needs to be, and then just picking players based on your need. Pick good football players that you think are going to enhance your overall team and give yourself the opportunity to put together, a sustainable team over the course of however many years.
When you look at the draft and some of the positions that some might consider strong, better than others, when you expect maybe some clusters of where there'll be like a run on a position, how much does that factor into saying, well, we could do it now, or if that's a position we like, and we like a lot of these guys, we think they're similarly graded, we can wait and patience to be on your side?
No, that's a fair question. I think kind of this time you're looking at kind of groups of players or clusters of players across different positions, and then I would say where that factors the most is trades. So if you're moving up, moving down, what are you moving away from? All right, if you move back 10 spots, there's 6 to 8 players you like. All right, there's a good chance to move back 10 spots. Maybe that same player would be there or within that cluster, and you're comfortable taking said 2 or 3 players within that group. So I would say you don't want to be too cute, but you also want to look at the totality of it, going back to to Brandon's question there, just understanding the group top to bottom and the depth of the overall draft across positions, I think is the most important thing.
Hey, Nick, how much did the evaluation of this first round of OTAs play into the factor of the draft? Maybe you see like one position group might be lacking more so than what you thought.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I would say probably not that much. Really, you hope to have a good understanding of where you think your team is as we stand. So Lovey and I actually talked about this the other day. When you go into the draft, you have to look at your team and say, okay, if we had to go out there and play tomorrow, all right, will we be able to go out there and feel a competitive team, be able to go out there and play? And I'd say the answer to that question is yes. So you don't want to have to rely on the draft so much and say, well, okay, like we can't play a game unless we draft like A, B, and C. So we have what we think is a decent idea of where our team is currently. Now, some of that will sort itself out here as we go. Maybe one player that you didn't think it was good as another one, he ends up passing the other one. That's going to play out over the course of, I would say, OTAs and then even in training camp. But as far as next week, it's really not going to factor that much into like who we actually end up drafting. I think there's kind of 2 separate buckets. So I think next week is really more of an opportunity to say, okay, We have our team as it's currently constructed. They've been here a couple weeks. They've been training. All right, now we're going to be able to get on the field a little bit and maybe to do a little bit more coaching, kind of working more individually, quarterbacks throwing to receivers, quarterbacks throwing to tight ends, not necessarily as much 11 on 11 or even 7 on 7 for that matter. So to make an assessment of 3 days in shorts, a guy throwing routes on air, I mean, like Canada, I could probably go out there and complete a few passes around in next week. But that doesn't mean like anything. It means probably not very much at all. So I think you just have to be careful about putting too much stock into really what goes on the 3 days next week.
Randy. Hey, Nick. You guys obviously have put a lot of emphasis on building the right culture around this building. Can you describe a little bit about the process when you evaluate these players, not only for their talent on the field, but the process of, hey, they're really good here, but can they be a fit with what we want inside this building? Describe that a little bit.
Yeah, honestly, that's a huge part of the process. So when a player comes into our building, okay, he's a Houston Texan, and he has to embrace everything that comes along with being a Houston Texan. And quite frankly, like, our building is different. There's 32 buildings that are all different. So when they walk in here, okay, here's the standard, here's the expectation, here's what we ask of you each day. And there's going to be a learning process that they have to go through. And what we try to do is be as comprehensive as possible in as many areas as possible. It's playing, it's coaching, it's interpersonal development, it's strength development, it's nutrition development, or overall education and understanding. They have to figure out the city of Houston, where to live, how far do they want to be from the stadium. Like this is so. Those are some of the things that you really don't spend too much time talking about, but they're important. And then when you're in the meeting room, okay, if I'm a linebacker and I walk in the meeting room and I'm in there with Kirko, I'm in there with KG, I'm in there with Neville, okay, like those players are, I would say, pretty important people. They're good people, they're solid people, they're hardworking, they're smart. There's a certain standard of behavior that's required. Now, when you walk in that room, like, you have to be able to kind of have enough self-awareness to know that, look, I'm new, I'm a rookie. I don't care how good of a player you are or what round you were drafted in. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter because you haven't earned anything. So I would say a lot of the rookies, more than anything, is they're off the field and interpersonal and overall self-awareness and understanding of how they act on a day-to-day basis and being conscious of whom they interact with within the building. That's as important as, okay, how fast they can run, how high they can jump, how many touchdowns they're going to score, how many tackles they're going to make. But we've spent a lot of time talking about it. I think it's taken some time to get to this point. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. Doesn't mean that we have all the answers. It just means this is something that we believe in, because you can't have a good team until you get those things right. And it doesn't necessarily ensure success. What it does ensure you is at least gives you a chance. So if you bring enough good people that are hardworking, that are selfless, that put the team first, that work hard, that are smart, that go out there and play decent football, okay, then our execution ultimately is going to determine how much success we have. But talent's important. I'm not saying talent's not important. Talent's important, but you have to combine that with a lot of other attributes, and that's what goes into making a successful player, and really ultimately what goes into having a successful team.
Cole and then Vanessa and Greg.
Nick, when you kind of look going back through the scouting notes and are trying to dissect certain players and prospects, does versatility, maybe a player who has immense reps at guard and tackle, kind of factor in, or not, who plays both safety and cornerback into the evaluation of where they sit on your big board?
It could be a part of it, but you have to go back and maybe get a better understanding of what that player was asked to do within their system, because it might be something different in our system. So just because a player has played, let's say, corner and slot corner, does that necessarily mean that he could do both for us? Or if a player has played safety and he's played slot corner, is he able to do both? So this is where I'd say the meeting and the interaction, how much information can they absorb? Can they handle the adjustments? Can they handle volume? Some players can go from the perimeter to inside of the offensive line. Some people can't. So some of that is a feel, and a lot of it is just how much can the player handle, how much can he absorb, and can he actually perform the job that you're asking him to do? Like, you could say, well, this guy, we're going to move, we think he's got tackle guard flex, but you might find out, you know what, he's really not good inside. We got to just keep him at tackle, and he's a tackle only. That's okay. All right, then that means we have to supplement the rest of that group with maybe somebody else. So you can look at it. There's a handful of examples of some players, which is kind of interesting. In game, they go from one position to the next. They go from right guard to right tackle, or they go from left guard to left tackle, which, I mean, that doesn't happen a lot, but when you see it, you kind of make note of it and go, okay, well, maybe that's something that we should investigate further. But then the player, maybe he says, you know what, I'm more comfortable here. Like, I mean, we sort of care what the players think, but we don't care. But, you know, you want to keep that in mind. So it's a part of the evaluation, but you don't want to get too caught up in it and just automatically just, okay, he did this in this system, let's drop him into our system, and we think he'll be able to do the same thing. It doesn't always necessarily work that way.
What are some of the intangibles that you look for when you're meeting with these guys, and what are some of the personality traits that are most?
Yeah, good question. I would say, you know, I'll give you an example. So when somebody talks about leadership, okay, so what does leadership mean? Okay, all right, give me an example, or give us an example of how you implement or institute leadership. I think sometimes you find that players can actually articulate that, like what it means. Some players that really don't have a tangible example. So it says, okay, like maybe his overall awareness of like what leadership is, like that answer, it's not like a lot of insight, but it kind of gives you some direction. You know, all right, maybe he's not as smart or have as much as maybe he thought he did. So you don't eliminate a player. I think you have to just be careful of and this is where, going back to the combine, 15 minutes, have a conversation with a guy, walks out of the room and say, oh, you know what? He's not a Houston Texan. You can't do that, all right? You have to spend more time, which I would say when we bring the players in here for a visit, it's pretty comprehensive. It's not just, okay, walk in, let's go have a steak, and then come back and shake his hands and tell him, like, hey, you know what, if you're there at 13, we're going to draft you. Like, we're not doing that. What we're going to do is, okay, you're going to meet, position coach. You're going to meet the coordinator. We're going to give you an install, okay? We're going to see if you can retain that information. Okay, we're going to talk to you about maybe an experience that you had on your team, or maybe an example of adversity, and see if they can articulate some thoughts. Okay, what's their overall understanding, overall awareness? All right, and say, you know what, maybe there's some things, maybe some risk factors. It doesn't necessarily eliminate the player, but you just have to understand when he walks in the building, okay, maybe he's not as far along in this area as we thought. Like, say, those are some of the things that I think are most beneficial of the in-house visits. And then we give them an opportunity to spend time with our strength staff, and they give them an opportunity to spend time with lad and nutrition, and talk about nutrition. Some of these guys have no idea like how important what you put in your body affects your performance on the field. That's important. It makes a difference. So trying to give them as much information as possible. And it's interesting too, because when they go in to talk to Lovey, they're on their best behavior. But, you know, when they're not talking to Lovey and maybe they're somewhere else with a different staff member, they give off a different vibe or a different message. Okay, so then you sort of corroborate the information. Now, wait a minute, like he was this way, but over here he said a different thing. Okay, well, maybe there's a gap. All right, we got to try to fill that gap. So, I mean, it's not like playing gotcha, but it's just trying to make sure we have enough checks and balances in place. So, again, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, when a player walks into the building, you're taking everything that comes along with this player, and our job is to understand it to the best of our ability and make sure our staff understands that and say, okay, here's an area, you know, we're going to have to really spend a lot of time on this. And if we have to allocate extra time, extra resources, that's okay. That's part of our responsibility, because the most important thing is to get that player to optimize their performance ultimately on Sunday. And however long that takes, whatever resources are required, like, we have to do that. We have to be committed to doing that. And all of us have to be committed to doing that, which, again, goes back to this is a Houston Texan pick. It's not somebody's individual pick. It's our pick. It's our player. We got to embrace them and then give them an opportunity to grow and develop.
You lead me into an understanding it's not your pick. It's not Lovey's pick. I'm sure you're aware. He has told us we can't play the kind of defense we want to play without improved play at quarterback. How much weight does that carry in the draft process, and how important is it that you and the head coach are on the same page with those kind of evaluations?
Sure. The most important thing is hopefully we give ourselves an opportunity to improve our football team. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve our football team. We're trying to continually build our football team. And the input of our coaching staff is a huge part of it. I mean, you know, I'd be ignorant not to take the input of our coaches, and we've given our staff a number of players to evaluate. We've actually gone through those evaluations, and, you know, if we have a discrepancy on a player, hey, you know, coach, what did you see with this player? You know what? We see it a little bit differently. Okay, then it forces you maybe to go back and do a little bit of extra work. I think the most important thing is at least to get the player in the general vicinity. And let's say you have a stack of 4 players. They see it 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe you see the third player as the second player, but at least you're kind of in the same zip code. Like, okay, it's when, okay, coach sees it one way, we see it a different way. There's a cavernous gap. You know what? All right, either A, we need to spend a little more time, or B, you know what? Let's just move on to another player. it's maybe not worth the hassle, or you know what, he's going to go somewhere that we're probably not even going to have an opportunity to pick him. But their input is valuable, and we have a pretty experienced staff, so they've seen a lot of players, they've evaluated a lot of players, so they're going to have input. Ultimately, the most important thing is for us to make the best decision for our team and just to keep moving forward. And whomever we pick, whoever that player is, whatever position he plays, he's here, he's ours, and we're going to do the best we can to develop him. So, I mean, look, everybody's going to have an opinion. We're respectful of their opinions. Ultimately, you know, I'm going to have to make the decision, but it's going to be done in concert, you know, with the group of people. But ultimately, if a player works, Lovey will get the credit. If he doesn't, you guys can blame me. So.
Nick, you mentioned on a couple of occasions, including today, don't be so sure that the picks we have today are the picks we're going to use then. And even with a small allotment last year, you were more than willing to move around in the draft, which I assume you'll be willing to do again. How is your philosophy on that? Would you call yourself aggressive when it comes to, we've spotted something we want, we know we can go get it, we have the assets to do it, here we go?
Flexible, open-minded, adaptable. I would say those are probably some adjectives that, you know, I would use to describe that process. So I'd say the reality is probably very few teams are going to want to come up to 3. I mean, just being honest. So, and that's okay. So probably pick at 3. And then 13, you know, could we go up? Could we go down? You know, talk to kind of, you know, I would say over the next week or so, you're going to talk to different teams, just more about positioning, about what's their philosophy, what's their willingness to kind of move. Some teams are just set, like, we're not moving, we're going to pick. Some teams only want to move down. Some teams say, you know what, we haven't really thought about that, but okay, maybe we consider moving up. So I think it's important just to be open-minded and more to be flexible. And this goes back to kind of what we talked about at the beginning. The better you understand the players and the better you understand the positioning of the board, it just gives you more, you know, opportunity to make good decisions. And if you feel like it makes sense to move either one direction or the other, I mean, again, maybe you have a cluster of players. There's 6 players. You'd like to get 2 of them. Okay, well, maybe you have to move one way or another in order to ensure you get one of those players. So if that's the best thing for our team, then we'll have that discussion or dialogue. I think Lovey's been pretty open-minded. We've had some discussions about that. Hey, Coach, you know what? Just be prepared either way. What are your thoughts? How do you feel? And, you know, he's been great about that. So, look, we want to be responsible. We're not going to do anything haphazardly. But, you know, just being able to pivot and kind of move and just being able to adjust. The first round, you probably have a little bit more time. You got 10 minutes to pick. I mean, but, you know, once you get going to second round, it's 7 minutes, and you get into 5 minutes. I mean, things happen pretty quickly. So you just want to make sure you're prepared. Make a good decision. Once you make a decision, you live with the decision, and you move on.
You talked earlier about how much goes into preparing for a draft. You talked about the guys who help you out. How do you all begin to assess the players who go undrafted? How quickly can you get them in your sign? Because just as much as you all are looking at, other clubs looking as well to get those guys who went undrafted.
Great question. You really want to try to maybe establish a little bit of a relationship or rapport with a player, so that the first time that you reach to that player isn't, you know, after the draft or on Saturday. But look, the reality is there's only so many players that are going to get drafted, 200 and however many slots there are. There's more players than that in the draft. So there's a number of players that aren't going to get drafted, and there's going to end up being some pretty good players for whatever reason aren't drafted. And I think you saw a pretty good example here in free agency this year. So you're talking about like one of the highest paid corners in free agency this year was a player that wasn't drafted. How the hell does that happen? I mean, again, it goes back to this process. There's no exact science. But being able to kind of say, all right, you know what? More likely than not, this player's not going to get drafted. So you try to earmark maybe the 5 or 6 players now. If half of them get drafted, okay, then you can go to maybe the last 3 and say, all right, you know what? And based on your roster, because what those players do, what their agents do, they look at the team and say, all right, where does he have the best opportunity, like realistically? And I would say just philosophically, like we don't really care where they come from. So if the undrafted player is better than the 3rd round pick, so be it. I mean, obviously something happened with the 3rd round pick that didn't work, but if that player is better than the other player, that's the way it goes. So you can't be afraid of that. I mean, that's just, you know, again, Austin Eckler is one of the best backs in the league. He basically displaced Melvin Gordon, essentially, who's a pretty good player. But Eckler's a good player, and he wasn't drafted. But, like, he's been, I would say, one of the better multi-purpose backs in the league. How does that happen? I mean, I don't know. If maybe somebody smarter than me knows that answer, but I certainly don't have one.
We'll close with Brooks, Brandon, and Aaron.
On that a little bit, I'm curious just from success rates late in the rounds, 5, 6, 7. In your final 5 years with the Patriots, it seems like there wasn't a year where you traded at least 1 5th or 6th or 7th, and then those turns into picks more. Is that more because you're seeing that, okay, that pick is more valuable as a trade piece, or maybe there's some more there, or I mean, how do you view that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brooks. It's really more about positioning, and it's about supply and demand relative to maybe players you have draftable grades on. So doesn't mean you're right or wrong, but let's say you're working through the process. You have, right now we have 3 6 and 1 7s, let's just say, right? And you're looking up there and you're looking at a group of players who you don't really have a draftable grade. So maybe there's a few. So, okay, if you think the player, like if you have some conviction about a player that you feel like he's going to make our team, he's going to have a role in the kicking game, all right, you know what, instead of waiting, maybe we take a couple picks, package them, and move them up a little bit just to kind of get that player on a roster. I'd say that's part of it. It's not, again, it's not, oh my gosh, like they gave up, 2 6-round picks to trade into the 5th round, like to draft Garrett Wallow. Like, I love Garrett. Garrett's great. But a lot of that, some of this is positioning, so more than anything else. So some teams are, I'd say, more inclined to even do that before the draft. Hey, we don't have any late-round picks. You know what? We'd like to acquire them. Okay, maybe we package a few of ours, ship them to somebody else, and then position ourselves maybe in a different spot. So this goes back to what we were talking about. I think I'm a pretty flexible, kind of open-minded individual, and try to be, open-minded. And it really is player-specific, grade-specific, draftable grades, and whether or not you think the player may actually have a realistic shot to make your team. If not, that's okay too. Then you're drafting a player to cut him to put him on a practice squad, but that's okay too. Sometimes you want to just get a player in a building, so at least you have them here. So there's no right or wrong answer. I think one of the things that you've probably noticed over the last maybe few years, there's more late round picks that have maybe stuck on rosters than previously. I mean, I'm sure somebody ran in percentages, which I know there's a lot of analytics people out there, there probably would show some merit to that. I mean, some position maybe more than others, but it just seems like that's something that's happening over the last few years.
You mentioned earlier about not getting too caught up in your perceived needs when you're drafting, but then also talked about collaborating with the coaches on y'all's evaluations of players. So I'm curious if you and Lovey or your staff and Lovey and the coaching staff, however way it works, have discussed Titus Howard's role on the team going forward, and if whether your projection of him as a player going forward factors into some of your draft evaluations and decisions.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You try to kind of separate some of that. So, because really your composition of your team, once you have your team, then look at your players and say, all right, how do we best utilize the player's skill set and his overall, playing ability. So it doesn't necessarily factor in. I think ultimately we're going to do what we feel is best for our team. So whether it's one position over the other, I mean, again, certain players, they feel more comfortable in other spots. Some players are based, coach, play me wherever the hell you want. Like, I'll do whatever the team needs me to do. Like, that's a great attitude. That's a great mindset. So let's get the best people on the field. Yes, utilize them accordingly, and try not to pigeonhole yourself. Well, we need to do this so we can do that. Well, you have to be careful about doing that. So good players, good people, going to be good teammates, and we think they're going to have a future here. Like, that's the most important thing.
When you look at the mock drafts, or if you do you guys do sort of your own things sometimes, whether it's for fun or just as an exercise, where you say, okay, we think this team might do this, let's go through some scenarios just so you kind of had a little bit of trial run, or is that the same in the business?
Yeah, try not to play like too many fantasy draft trades. That's for you guys to do. So I think what you do, kind of what I do is just you look at the teams around you and try to get an idea, okay, if you're going to move back 6 spots, all right, what's the cost associated with that? Or if we're going to move up 4 spots, okay, what are you giving up in return? I think those are things you just kind of do kind of on your own, just to kind of have an overall awareness and understanding so that like the first time you're talking about a trade up or down isn't like you're sitting around a clock with 7 minutes and said team calls and said, yeah, we're interested in pick 37. Okay, here's what it's going to take. And you're scrambling around going, wait a minute, I haven't really thought about that. So try to do some of that now, but you really can't get too caught up in it because there's so much that can happen. And I'd say trades are really player driven anyways. So a lot of it's going to be based on, what you're looking at, what teams are looking at, and ultimately like the decision that they make is going to be what, they think is the best for them. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Great. See you guys next week.
Welcome back to Texans Draft Live, presented by Verizon. You just heard from General Manager Nick Caserio, his pre-draft press conference just 7 days before the 2022 NFL Draft. Nick will actually be joining us here very shortly, answering some fan questions. So don't go anywhere, because we've never had our general manager answer our fan questions. And put your questions in if there's something that you might want to ask him. What could you possibly want to ask him a week before the draft? Let's take a look, though, now at our picks for the 2022 NFL Draft, what the Texans have. These are their draft picks. John Harris over here has them memorized.
Yeah, I do. 3, 13, 37, 68, 80, 107, 108. Now, at that point, I think it's 183, 204, 205, 245, something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, 205, 207. All right. I'm struggling in the 6th round, so hopefully Nick trades those, because I know I know all the others.
He did say we have 7 picks in the top 108, but don't hold your breath on those staying the same. So you memorizing all those picks might be moot, Johnny, because they may not remain this.
Oh, I'm so convinced of the fact that we are not picking at those spots. We are not picking at those spots. I learned that last year. Like, no, just those are placeholders for now. That's really all they are. So I'm not. I am definitely, as he said, not holding my breath at that point. So
I thought it was interesting that Nick did say you might not have a lot of teams trading up for that number 3 spot, but that may be a different case at the number 13 spot, Johnny.
It's going to be fun to watch and see what happens. Getting up to number 3 in a draft that doesn't have a ton of quarterbacks gets kind of interesting, but 13, I think could be a fun spot right there, the pick that came from Cleveland. So we'll see. I'm just curious whether we're going to end up getting 2 picks in the first round. So maybe we can just ask him. Maybe that's our first fan question. How many picks are you going to have in the first round, Nick Caserio?
No comment.
I'm sure fans are. I'm really excited to see what the fan questions
this
are. Nick,
guy.
First of all, welcome in. We were just saying this has never happened where we had the general manager answer questions live from fans. So
happy to do it.
We are
absolutely good to be here. Good to be here.
I can't possibly imagine what fans might be wanting to ask, but let's get into some of the questions. Lucas wants to know a very important question.
Yes.
Where is your vest? Johnny and I are wondering the same thing.
I'm telling you, I can't win. I know that my vests are a hot topic of discussion. Admittedly, I can't believe I'm admitting this. I think I have like 15 or 16, but I didn't wear one here today. So I'm sorry if I let anybody down. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. So I'll make sure maybe to incorporate one over draft weekend. Hopefully, maybe we'll see.
I grabbed mine in the closet to wear it, and I went, "Oh wait, not today." And then I didn't. All right. This one comes from Kevin. Nick, what'd you learn from last year's draft?
I think regardless of how many picks you may or may not have, it's just try to capitalize and just make good decisions, for the organization. And, I think we try to do that to the best of our ability. I think what's important when you're drafting players is just not to have unreasonable expectations. Try to simplify it for the player. They have enough to learn, and they have enough on their shoulders when they walk in the building. So just try to make sure that we're identifying the things that are important for us, the type of people that we want to have in the building, and just maximize our opportunities. And really, ultimately, when they come in the building, it's sort of out of our hands to a degree. It's up to the player. It's up to the staff. And I would say really a credit to the coaches last season and to the players, because I think you saw growth and development from the beginning until the end of the season, really on all 5 players. And I think they were able to capitalize on the opportunities they had in front of them. So, hopefully we can have some modicum of success here next week as well, and just continually build and continually press forward.
I mean, you've covered a lot of drafts in your time in the NFL, but this is your second draft as general manager. Does it feel a lot different than it did last year? I mean, the situation seems completely different than it was a year ago.
Yeah, it's a fair question. You try not to get too caught up in it. I think you just try to stay consistent to your process, stay consistent to the things that you feel are important, and we talked about a little bit of this in the press conference, try to have as thorough an understanding of as many players and the board as possible so that you can make good decisions. You're making decisions in real time, and you don't know when those decisions are going to take place. Once you pick a player let's just take the 3rd pick. So, okay, there's 2 players that are going to get picked before us, whomever they are. We hopefully are going to get a decent player at pick 3. So that pool of players is, I would say, a little bit smaller than some of the other players as you move throughout the draft. So it's just being prepared, trusting your information, try not to overanalyze it and try not to overcomplicate it, and just try to stay consistent all the way through, regardless if it's pick 3 or if it's pick 243 or 205 or wherever some of those late picks are.
All right, let's get to another fan question. This is from Dominic and Ailey from over in my hood. What do you think about our running back room?
Yeah, it's an interesting combination, I would say, of kind of youth and experience. Other than really Rex, in terms of players that really made a contribution last season, a lot of those players didn't really have too many snaps, at least for the Houston Texans. So, Scotty, unfortunately, was limited last year, was injured, but, he's shown some things in the preseason. Marlon's been a productive player at different points, so he has an opportunity here in front of him. Dare's been, I'd say, a pretty consistent player in Jacksonville. He's had a good role in the kicking game. Royce, had small opportunities, limited opportunities last year, but, there's really not a whole dearth of opportunities. But I would say it's a group that they all have varying degrees of experience playing. And even Jed Anderson, who kind of came to us late in the offseason, during the season last year in the practice squad, he's made a lot of progress, I'd say, in terms of his strength and development from January till now. So it's an interesting group. I think once we get on the field a little bit, it will start to crystallize a little bit more. So, if there's an opportunity for us to add to that group, we will. If there's not, I think we'd be able to go out there and be able to function with the group that we have here in the building.
All right, Maria wants to know, what excites you about a Pep Hamilton offense?
Yeah, I think Pep's had a lot of success through the years, being able to run the football and being able to get the quarterbacks to play well. So I think the biggest thing probably for our group is just going to be some of the terminology and just how we call plays and some of those types of things. So, but Pep's a good coach. He's a lot of experience. He's had a lot of, I would say, good experiences with the quarterback position. He really teaches that position, the details and the mechanics of it. Now to be able to project that over the entire group. But I think, we want to be able to run the football. We want to be able to play physical. So I think those are some things that we're going to try to emphasize. And it's a collective effort. It's not going to be just about the offensive line. It's not going to be about the tight ends and running backs. It's all everybody's going to be involved, even the receivers to some degree. So I think Pep's excited about the opportunity. I think the one thing you notice is just the way he works with the staff. It's really kind of cool. I mean, it's a very collaborative effort. He respects the coaches. A lot of those coaches have worked with him. He trusts them. They trust him in turn. So that carries a lot of weight. And then, when you transfer that to the players see that. So ultimately, it's about results. And offense is being able to move the football and score points. So, I mean, ultimately, that's going to be the most important thing for us.
Have you improved your mechanics on our Pep?
I haven't thrown that much in the spring.
You need to work on that.
You got OTAs coming up. We'll see you out there.
Better get the wing loose. This is from Joey downtown. Very simply put, who are you going to draft?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question.
We got this question more than any other.
I think we probably got to wait.
I'm sure you're not
Joey's
surprised.
one of many asking this question.
It's a fair question. I think we'll know here, in another week or so. But I think, we have a list of players that we feel comfortable drafting at number 3. And I think, assuming we pick there, which I think there's a good chance we're going to. So just try to get, a good player that we think is going to come in here and help our team. It's not about, one player is not going to solve our problems. It's just stacking them up as we go. So, we've had an opportunity to evaluate a lot of players. We had a lot of dialogue and discussions internally with the staff, with the scouting staff, with the coaching staff. And I think we've kind of narrowed down that pool of players who we feel comfortable with. So ultimately, we're going to have to make a decision, and we'll pick a player, and then we're going to move. We're going to move forward.
All right, we're excited to see who those players might be, and we don't really have to wait too much longer. In 1 week, we'll start to know whether it's one, two, however many
it is.
On Thursday.
That's
it is.
Right.
Nick Caserio, general manager for the Houston Texans. Nick, thank you so much for the time, and we really look forward to seeing what unfolds next week.
Thanks for having me. Excited about next week, and go Texans.
All right, on behalf of Nick Caserio, Tyler Marcotte, and John Harris, I'm TP Sidhu. Thanks so much for watching Texans Live, presented by Verizon.